Welcome to the American Small Business League podcast. I am Bruce Torres, and with me is Alex Kelloff, running for Congress as a Democrat in Colorado District 3. His website is alexkelloff.com, and it says that Alex is an accomplished entrepreneur, financial executive, and committed community advocate whose family's Colorado heritage dates back to 1893. Thank you very much for joining me this morning, Alex. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. As you know, the first half is going to be all about you, why you're running, what you want to do for your district, and then our small business issues to get your thoughts and opinions about such. So, for people meeting you for the first time, what are the first things you like to say?
Well, thanks. Thanks again, Bruce. Well, my roots are rooted deep in this congressional district, Colorado's third district, which is one of the largest congressional districts in the country. It's 27 counties spread over 53,000 square miles. So it truly is all of Western Colorado and most of Southern Colorado. And as you said in the introduction, my roots go back to 1893 when my great grandfather and his three brothers immigrated, like many at the time, to dig coal. And they immigrated to Trinidad, Colorado, which is in the district. And over time, my grandfather was born in a small town called Aguilar. Most of the family moved west across southern Colorado, and they almost all became small business people. So my dad grew up in the San Luis Valley. My grandfather in 1933, during the Great Depression, started what was called Kelloff's Food Markets. So it was a small business, grocery store chain across southern Colorado. But most of the family they owned movie theaters, furniture stores, general stores, you name it, restaurants. They were just small business people across southern Colorado. My mother grew up in Grand Junction, which is part of western Colorado, and her father also was a small business person. He worked on his own as a carpenter and tile layer. Um, so the whole family history is rooted in the district, but also in small business. So in particular, I appreciate your interest in talking with me this morning. I've never run for public office. This is the first time running for public office. My 30 plus year career has been in business, mostly in the telecommunications industry. We built physical assets, physical infrastructure. We laid things like fiber optic cable, bringing the internet to rural areas. But I've also been an entrepreneur myself. I helped to found Armada Ski Company, which is one of the leading ski manufacturers in the world, actually. So I have a bit of entrepreneurial background. I've also had my hand in formation of many, many telecommunications firms that have created good jobs across this country and frankly internationally as well.
Internationally, yes, as well. And there was some work you did related to the government. You've got a master's degree, and do you have two master's degrees? Maybe I read your bio quickly. Talk to me more about that, those kind of backgrounds.
Sure. I do have two master's degree. I have a master's of science in telecommunications. I originally got into telecommunications in the mid 1990s when the internet was becoming a thing. I was always fascinated by the fact that if one had internet access, they had access to all of the same information in the world that anyone else would have. It didn't matter your background, your ethnicity, your socioeconomic standing. And that was a compelling idea for me that's always stuck with me, and that's why I entered the telecommunications field right as the internet was taking off. So I pursued a master's degree in telecommunications, and then after that, I went on to get my MBA as well.
Thank you. And I saw you document your show affiliation or work with, it looks like investment firms. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. When I started my career out of college, it was really as a network engineer. I was more on the technical side of computer systems, information technology. You mentioned a moment ago, I did have some government work. For a time, I was embedded alone with the Marine Corps. I did not serve, so I don't mean to say that I served in the military, but I was by myself with the Marine Corps, working at the Pentagon and then later at Quantico. I worked on classified systems. I held a top secret clearance for a time. After that, I went on to do more management consulting work with leading telecommunications firms around the world. I've either lived or worked in over a dozen countries. So I spent a lot of time overseas in the late 90s and early 2000s during the dot-com boom, advising telecommunications and IT firms, internet firms. And I went on to get my MBA. And then after my MBA, I worked on Wall Street for a time where over time I rose to lead the global investment banking team focused on telecommunications. So I was very involved in raising billions of dollars for early stage and sometimes later stage telecommunications firms to help them fund their growth, hire people, build infrastructure, and the like, primarily spreading and bringing internet access to people across the country and throughout the world. So I was very proud of that work. I left that in 2017. I went on to help start an investment firm called SDC Capital Partners. I was there until taking a step back from that career in really early last year, early 2025, to pursue this candidacy for Congress. But that firm in particular, we also invested directly in starting companies. We primarily spent most of our time focused on creating new businesses, standing up businesses across the U.S. to do just like I talked about, bring the internet to rural areas primarily.
Thank you. I've got a nice self-education in American history and what also has been called the deep state, things like that. So I want to ask, did any of that consultation work that you did kind of overseas, was that for your private companies or was any of that as affiliated with the government or intelligence agencies in any way?
No, these were all either uh, public corporations, if you will, or yeah, that was it. They were all public companies. I did no government work overseas. All of the government work that I did was here in the US.
Thank you. And I invite you to embellish on that along the lines of what's wonderful on your website, your proud declaration of not taking any corporate PAC money. So now you could please, feel free to go anywhere you want, but to talk
Sure.
about your strategies, but also your hopes, goals, dreams, desires for your district.
Sure. So we've had a very strong, well, let me step back and say I've been running my campaign now for almost 13 months. So that's a good 18 months before the general election, which will come November 3rd. And I got in early because, as I said, I've never run for public office before. So I realized that I had to get in the race early, put in the hard work, meet people where they're at, learn and listen to them about informing my platform. And I know we'll get into that and talk more about that in a few minutes. But I got in early to do that hard work and begin to build name recognition, campaign recognition, and listen and learn from the people. I think that's critically important, particularly for a district like this, which really represents really rural America. Yeah, we got in to do the hard work. We've been at it now. Fundraising, we've raised over $1.1 million into the campaign. That's only come from individual donors. We've had over 3,000 contributors, and most of that comes from in district. So, not taking any corporate PAC money. We've not taken any money other than from individuals. Um, and so we're very proud of that, and we're going to continue that.
Talk to me about the district. Describe your district, its wants, needs, problems, strengths, etc.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. It's interesting because I've been campaigning now for 13 months. There are people that I met at the very beginning of the campaign and that I'm seeing again for the second or third time, fourth time now. And oftentimes I get asked, like, what have you learned over the last year of campaigning? And the thing that goes to your question, I think that's the very critical thing that I've learned is I don't believe that our rural areas in America are being adequately represented in Washington, D.C. And let me give you an example of that. So our current representative, Jeff Hurd, who's an incumbent freshman Republican, voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill. It does a lot of bad things in my view, but one of the things that I think is important to note is it really devastates Medicaid funding, and Medicaid funding is critical to our rural hospitals. We have the most rural hospitals in Colorado from any of the other seven. There's eight total congressional districts, so we have the most out of any of those other seven. Rural hospitals are critically important. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. It doesn't matter your ethnicity, your religion. Needs rural hospitals. We have things, our agricultural industry, farming, ranching is some of the largest economic industries in our district. Um, they rely on rural hospitals. Retired people rely on rural hospitals. If we want to keep food security and the supply chain of food in this country, we need to ensure that we have medical care for them in these rural areas. Will you see that Jeff Hurd voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill that critically puts at risk some of our rural hospitals? So it's a long-winded answer to say, like, I don't believe our rural values are being represented by our elected representatives today. And that's the number one thing I've learned in campaigning in this district over the last year.
If it's as urgent as all that, it could be you could have a one issue candidacy and make a compelling case. But what are the other things that when you flesh them out, your audiences are nodding their head and they're saying, that sounds just what I want to send to Washington?
Absolutely. I think, look, across the country, and it's not just in these rural areas, it's everywhere, cost of living, right? I mean, I mentioned healthcare with respect to the rural hospitals and Medicaid, but affordable access to healthcare, it's out of control. I mean, I hear stories all the time of people that were paying $400 per month for their insurance. Now they would be paying $2,000 a month because of things like the premium tax credits being sunsetted again, for things like Medicaid and others, programs being cut. So when you're paying $2,000 a month, that becomes unaffordable. And these people that I talk to, like this specific story, she's now going without health care because she can't afford it. This problem's only going to get worse. But the other issues that I hear about are gasoline prices, diesel prices, cost of fertilizer for farmers, um, access to housing. Colorado is the third most expensive state in the country. So some of this is more local issues, but some of this is obviously driven in part by federal decisions. The war in Iran is clearly driving inflation. So cost of living is critical and very, very important. Again, it's a nonpartisan, it's an apolitical issue. The other thing that's critically important that's different in this district than many others across the US is public lands and water. We're coming off the worst snowpack year we've ever had on record, and there's critical risk of wildfire in this state. And you have the federal government not providing FEMA assistance to Colorado because Donald Trump isn't happy that in the 2024 election, he lost Colorado. So he's not providing FEMA assistance. So to give you a specific example, last summer we had a fire, one of the largest wildfires in the history of Colorado and the country. It was called the Lee Wildfire in Rio Blanco County, up in a town called Meeker. This is largely agricultural. It was one of the worst fires ever. We've received no FEMA assistance for this. You look at other places across the US. I'm aware from a former fire chief who was telling me he was investigating a wildfire in Texas a few weeks back. They had a wildfire there. They got FEMA assistance in 2 weeks later. So these are issues that are critically important to this district, again, on a nonpartisan, apolitical basis.
Will you be running against this Republican? Excuse me. Do you have a primary before the general?
I do. So in the state of Colorado, our primary is on June 30th. That's for everyone. So that's Republicans, Democrats alike. I've been at it for 13 months. My competitor jumped in the race about 6 weeks ago. He put out his platform about 2 weeks ago. I copied mine word for word. We feel very good about our momentum and prevailing on June 30th. and looking forward to flipping this seat November 3rd. So we do have
Well,
a primary, but we feel pretty good about where we're positioned.
why the optimism to flip the seat from Republican to Democrat? Was the district always uh, not up for grabs, but did it go Republican Democrat per the candidate, or has it been a stronghold for Republicans?
Yeah, it always, I think this is a very, I would call it pragmatic district. The voter composition in this district, which is follows a similar trend in Colorado, it's roughly 51% unaffiliated. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the people are independent, although many of those unaffiliated voters are independent. For anyone to win, if you're the Republican or Democrat, you can't rely on the votes from just your party. You need the majority of unaffiliates. So it is imminently winnable. And historically, it's gone back and forth between Democrat and Republican.
Hmm.
And typically, the Democrats were historically more thought of as like blue dog Democrats, if you will. So the
Mhm.
last Democrat that held this seat, who, by the way, I'm proud to have his public endorsement, which I received early on, was John Salazar. And John held this seat back in 2010. So it has trended more Republican lately. And people will probably best know this district, frankly, because this was Lauren Boebert's seat before 2024 when she decided to move districts to Eastern Colorado and Colorado's fourth district. So this is Lauren Boebert's old seat, but historically it's gone back and forth between Democrat and Republican. And people typically vote for the candidate they think will best represent their values and interests in the district.
What has moved you the most recently? What have you enjoyed or experienced just in the last few weeks that has given you great thought or great encouragement?
Look, it's always nice to visit Southern Colorado, the San Luis Valley, and have 80% of the people that I meet come up to me and say, "We knew your family. Your family was well respected. We shopped at the grocery stores. We did business with your family." I mean, John Salazar, as an example, I had not met him before he invited me down to his hometown for lunch, and he after lunch, he said, "You have my endorsement. I used to do business with your family, and I always respected them as good pillars of the community." So that's very heartening. Look, I'm the son of lifelong public servants. My dad is 83, and after almost 60 years of working at the National Institutes of Health, he still goes to work every day. And I think that really resonates with people, that legacy of public service, and frankly, that commitment of still going. I think he should retire, but he still goes to work every day. And I think people appreciate that. So I'm very heartened by those things on a personal level. But look, I love and enjoy meeting with the people, hearing their stories. For all the hardship you hear out there, there's always optimism and hope.
Mhm.
And that gives me hope that we can not just flip the seat, but ensure that we take back Congress and
Mhm.
we get back to Congress fulfilling its constitutional obligation as a co-equal branch of government and actually
Mhm.
going to work and doing something and hopefully restoring our democracy. Because I am concerned about the direction of this country under Donald Trump and people like Jeff Hurd that are just serving Donald Trump and not their constituents or the American people, in my view.
Alex, what proposals or solutions or types of solutions are you putting forth? And I know that I've talked to a number of candidates in our project here to speak to as many as possible. And but answer that if you would,
Yeah,
because I've got a good picture of your understanding of the concerns of your district and the
sure.
state and the nation. But talk a little bit about your kind of proposals.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have major fiscal issues in this country, whether it's our debt now at roughly $39 trillion, whether it's our deficits that under this administration, it's the highest it's ever been and it continues to climb. I believe in strong national security, but I also think part of that is through building alliances with our allies overseas, of which I said I have a lot of international experience. I have friends all around the world, so I know something about this. And yet this administration wants to raise our defense budget by 44% next year to $1.5 trillion while cutting other critical services that we as Americans rely on and constituents here do. So when I talk about services that are provided by the government, whether at the federal level, the state level, municipal level, I view these as critical investments we make in our communities, right? So whether it's Social Security, which will be insolvent within the decade if we don't do something about that, whether it's Medicaid, like I talked about, is critically important to rural hospitals, and other programs like this, like these. So, I believe one in viewing these government services not as handouts, as investments that our ancestors, generations that came before us made. So my background is building critical infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, telecommunications networks, water infrastructure, transportation. These are investments we make in our communities that over the long term have demonstrated that they have very good returns on investments for everyone. It's not singled out to Republicans or Democrats or whomever make them. So I want to get back to viewing these programs, these services as critical investments that we make in our communities to the benefit of all. So just
Yeah.
philosophically, that's part of it. More specifically, look, we haven't maintained our critical infrastructure, which is critical to our economies and our well-being and allowing our communities to thrive. And part of the funding, I saw a study the other day that said there's another hidden liability across the US, which is within larger cities. I don't even think this counted the smaller towns like we have in my district, that there's $1 trillion liability of of unaddressed maintenance for our infrastructure in our cities. So again, things like sewage, water, electric, utilities, and all of that. My experience and some of my specific ideas to bring to Congress are reforming the tax code so we incentivize more private capital into redeveloping the critical infrastructure we need, reinvesting in it, maintaining that infrastructure, enhancing that infrastructure so that we have the utility grid energy that we need. We have certainly rising demand. You see energy costs going up. And so some of those specific ideas are reforming the tax code to incentivize private capital. I have a lot of experience in public-private partnerships, and there's no one specific idea, one specific business model, if you will, that fits all of that. But I do think we could create centers of excellence very cost effectively at the federal government. So when communities like Grand Junction or Pueblo or Durango in my district say, I need to fund airport improvements or airport expansion, how can I go find a business model that's been shown to work, whether it's in the US or frankly internationally, where I don't need to recreate the wheel and it will incentivize private capital coming in while maintaining good governance by publicly elected local officials or otherwise. And
Mhm.
and so the taxpayers are protected, are looked after. Private capital can earn a reasonable return on investment, possibly through tax incentives or otherwise. And these things get funded when otherwise we won't have taxpayer funds that can fund these projects alone, just because, again, we're running $39 trillion deficits and that does, or debt, and that doesn't even account for debts at the local level or at the state level.
And I could listen to more and more and more about that, but I want to get a question in here before I
Yeah.
forget. From your experience in technology and awareness of the investment in AI and the controversy about the data centers, and what people like Catherine Austin Fitts at Solari.com, Solari.com, are warning about the grid that's being erected around us that is just one click away from being a digital enslavement collar around our necks if they introduce digital programmable currency. Talk into all of those concerns from what you know about the power of technology and these forces that are around Trump and how he's aiding and abetting this enormous and quite frankly frightening, and a lot of that fear might be fear porn by his opposition just to get us glued to our screens, But talk into that horrific scenario, please.
Yeah, so I think that, this administration in particular is the most corrupt we've ever seen in the history of America. It might even be more corrupt than all previous administrations combined, in my opinion. So I do worry about some of the policies that are being enacted and some of the crony corruption that's going on that's enriching this family and people around him. Clearly, you can pay for pardons. We've seen that many times over. And so, part of that, other than just the moral and ethical implications of being concerned about the corruption, is the incentives around large corporations. And I don't mean to paste all large corporations as evil or anything like that. I mean, they obviously employ a lot of people and they're critical to our economies and they give us a technological edge around the world. But it benefits larger corporations that can deal with regulations, that can deal with the cost of doing business, healthcare as an example, to provide healthcare to employees. You need large scale to be able to survive and thrive. And so, what I'm very focused on, as we've talked about, is small business formation, job creation from that, entrepreneurship, of which I have a long history and track record of success in. And frankly, in this district where I'm running, you look at the largest employers, it's things like the healthcare industry, it's things like education and educators. We don't have a lot of large employers. It's mostly small business people. I talked about my background in the small business history from my family going back over 130 years here. That's what I'm focused on. And I think by strengthening small business, we can combat the ills that this administration is perpetrating on us with all its corruption. So
Hmm.
look, I've also worked in the data center business, having been in telecommunications. Data centers are critical to our economic and national security future, but it's important that we site and build data centers where it makes sense. It doesn't make sense in my district. We don't have the water, we don't have the utility infrastructure, nor do we have the power generation. And frankly, people don't want it for all the environmental reasons you hear about nationally.
Thank you. And we are, the American Small Business League for a reason. And echoing and embellishing your sentiments about small businesses, Alex, I love saying this. We are nothing but a small business nation. 99.9% of all businesses in America are small businesses
Thank you, Bruce.
with less than 500 employees.
Yeah.
98% have less than 100, and they
Hmm.
create the vast majority, some years 95% of all new jobs are created by small businesses. Now, just to remind you and get everybody up to speed, the federal government has the goal of steering 23% of its contracting dollars, what it spends on goods and services, to small businesses. And every year it says that it does. But for decades, we have shown that is not true. Big businesses, the 1/10 of 1% of all businesses in America, get the vast majority of all federal contracts, including most of those that we are told have gone to small businesses.
Mm.
And right there is the reason for folks to go to our site, ASBL.com, and see this and get convinced about it, because the big businesses generally don't create new jobs when they get those contracts. Whereas, Alex, if small businesses really got 23% of the federal contract purchases, they would create about 2.3 million jobs on top of the jobs that small businesses are creating every year anyway. And it's the bottom line is Washington and its agencies and the SBA that declare success about these contracting goals have been captured by the biggest companies in this country and around the world. Now, there's two other layers I've got to get on the table, and then I'm going to be all ears to get your opinion about these things specifically.
Sure.
We have a project called don'tcheatwomen.com, which wants to raise the 5% goal to 15%. Because right now, women owned small businesses are supposed to, the goal is to steer 5% of the budget to them. And that's only happened supposedly twice. We know from our research and other investigations by Congress and the SBA's own Inspector General, women-owned small businesses probably get less than 1%
Mhm.
of that budget. And what's so wrong about that? It's this. Women own 40% of all the businesses in America, and they sell what the government buys. There is no justification for companies owned by men to get over 95% of the federal contract dollars. But wait, there's more. Hot off the presses, April 27th, a new bill in Congress, in the House and in the Senate, wants to abolish the WOSB, Women Owned Small Business, program and goal completely, which would fairly guarantee that companies owned by men get 100%
Wow.
of the federal contract dollars. Now, DEI had a lot of insanity that needed to be addressed over the last few years, and that's a fine thing in my personal opinion. But this cuts to the fundamentals of just fairness and also job growth. If you wipe out contract dollars going to women-owned small businesses, that's almost savage and barbaric. And we are spreading the word, and we're asking everybody, and it's going to be in the show notes, who and what to contact in the House and in the Senate to
Good.
oppose these bills. In the House, it's HR 8511, and in the Senate, it's S 4390. So, Alex, I hope I wasn't yelling. What do you think about all that?
I mean, I'm not as steeped and familiar with those bills, but I share your view, Bruce. I mean, again, I'm very focused on incentivizing small business formation, entrepreneurship. All of the large businesses that exist today at one time or another came from small businesses. Um, and so I think we need to focus on uh, uh, streamline regulation that makes it easier to start businesses. I think we need to make it easier for small businesses through the SBA and other programs for small businesses to get loans. I think we need to ensure universal access to healthcare so that small business entrepreneurs, you know, it, when you're worried about 15 to 20% of your overhead costs going to healthcare, oftentimes either you can't provide healthcare to your employees if you're very, under 10 people or something like that, or it just becomes so unwieldy where you just shut down and you just can't make it to scale. And again, the large businesses love this because they have the scale to be able to deal with this overburdensome regulation. So I'm very focused on streamlining regulations, making it easier to stand up businesses, have it be fair to, whether that's gender, race. I love the diversity component. We have a very diverse district here. 26% of this electorate is Latino, Hispanic. A lot of great small business people in that community. Um, as I said earlier, originally 130 years ago, my family were immigrants. So I'm not
I
as
know.
familiar with both the House and Senate bills you just spoke about, but it sounds like we're very much on the same page
Yeah, the
that
bills are
we can't let
identical.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, the bills are identical. They were introduced by a representative and a senator, obviously, and they would also abolish the Minority Business Administration and the 5% goal that 5% of the budget ought to go to
Yeah.
minority-owned businesses. So we're trying to raise a big hue and cry about it. And I also invite you to, vet our claims and see if you can get behind espousing a look-see as to where are quote unquote small business contracts really going. That's been our
Mm.
decades-long revelation and drum we pound, but then also examining these new bills and the necessity of not only protecting the 5% goal for both minority and for women-owned small businesses, but raising the women-owned goal, particularly to something more fair. That means that companies owned by men would still get 85% of the federal contract expenditure. So I appreciate you giving a listen to all these things
Sure.
and invite you to have the fun of experimenting, road testing these in your campaign appearances, et cetera, or in your one-on-ones, your coffee meetings,
Yeah.
and all that you do. What are your kind of final thoughts, summary, reemphasize, or what haven't we discussed that you wish you could get into this conversation?
Yeah, look, I think historically, right or wrong, I think the Republican Party is typically seen as the party that's for business. I think it's morphed in this thing that's unrecognizable, such that it's for big business. And that you asked me earlier about taking corporate PAC money, of which I answered I'm taking none. The problem is that these large corporations or wealthy individuals are contributing so much to Republican campaigns. It makes it hard for the small businesses to survive. I mean, look at the tariff policy of this administration. And then because of this illegal, I mean, the Supreme Court found Trump's tariff policy illegal, thankfully, but that didn't shield many business people in the US from reciprocal tariffs. Well, you know what? When you're making large campaign contributions because you're large businesses or billionaire business people to the Trump administration, lo and behold, you're getting carve-outs, exclusions, etc. So I just want people to know that this administration is hurting small business people. You talked about some of the aspects of that in my view as well. Um, but the Republican Party no longer is the party for the common person who's trying to build a small business, be an entrepreneur out there, thrive in their communities, create jobs like my family did for over 130 years, started those businesses in the Great Depression and thrived because they had that community support. And so I'm running to focus on these things to create small businesses, enable small businesses to thrive, incentivize entrepreneurship. I think that's where we get back to, just like the statistics you cited about small businesses being the vast majority of the employers in this country. We need to get back to small business formation and growth and incentivize that. And I think we'll be a much better country and healthier for it.
Thank you. Tell us again your website and what people should look at when they get there.
Sure. So the website is Alex Kelloff. It's Kelloff. It's like Kellogg, but with F's. It's alexkelloff.com. All of our social media handles, we're on every social media platform, is Alex Kelloff CO. So Alex Kelloff, Colorado. Please follow on social media. The website has lots of information both about my background and the platform I'm running on, small business formation, reducing the cost of living, protecting our public lands and our water, and upholding the rule of law and making sure Congress gets back to fulfilling its constitutional obligation as a co-equal branch of government under the Constitution.
Like I said, I just want to thank you for throwing your hat in the ring to try to do something good for your district and the American people. This whole show, I'm going to have artwork up, Alex, that has your website displayed throughout this whole conversation.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much for joining me. I really enjoyed talking with you. And now I want to thank everybody for watching and listening today.